Rashida Manuel of Green Umbrella. She is the Director of Public Engagement at Green Umbrella, an intersectional environmental and social organization in Cincinnati, Ohio. Rashida is recognized as a passionate advocate of racial and gender justice with over a decade of professional experience as a social justice advocate. Rashida works to bridge nonprofit, corporate, and academic cultures to effectively build coalitions. Thank you, Rashida, for being here.
Thank you, Sean. I'm glad to be here.
Tell us what's going on in Cincinnati.
Sure.
Tell us
Yeah.
stories.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a story time for us today. So hopefully you all are in the mood for a story at the end of a long day, I'm sure. It's 6:30 p.m. here, so it's been a long day for me. So yesterday was an air quality alert day here in Cincinnati. It was really hot, 93 degrees, and that's hot for us. When I was a kid, I used to dread these days because of my chronic asthma. Air quality alert days meant that I couldn't play outside. I had to sit in the house with the air conditioning blasting and watch endless hours of Mr. Belvedere, Growing Pains, and Who's the Boss reruns. It was the 90s. So that meant that on the occasion that I was able to leave my house, my mom would drape a damp towel over my face to filter out the polluted air. And, you know, most of the times it worked, but sometimes it didn't work. And on the days when it didn't work, I'd be forced to watch my beloved Mr. Belvedere from the cold plastic seats of Cincinnati Children's Hospital's emergency room. It meant that breathing, treatments, and steroids, and worried hovering adults, and more time not being able to spend with my friends outdoors. When I was a kid, I thought I knew a thing or two about asthma. So I thought. It was like my family's thing. We all had asthma. My dad had it the worst. On old pics, his face was like really puffy and his eyes were red from the steroids that he used to have to take to strengthen his lungs. My mom had it too when she was a kid. My sister also had it. So the inability to breathe was as normal for my family as the ability to breathe was for other families. So what I didn't know was that my family wasn't unique. That scores of other Black families dealt with similar health issues, that it wasn't just a genetic luck of the draw, but it was the result of policies that placed BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities in precarious locations in close proximity to things like industrial plants, like the local chemical plant that was just a couple miles down from my house that shattered our apartment when it exploded in 1990. Like the Ivorydale district, which is named for, if you know anything about Cincinnati, you know that we are the headquarters for Proctor Gamble. And so that Proctor Gamble factory that led the way for a whole district to be formed full of factories and plants. And that community, or that district, neighbors Interstate 75 to the east, and then a predominantly Black federal housing project to the west. It was the result of substandard housing that was often found in predominantly Black and low-income communities that were energy inefficient, making them expensive to heat in Cincinnati's blustery winters and expensive to cool in our hot, muggy summers. Summers in Cincinnati are so hot, sweltering. 93 degrees is pretty hot for us. And because we're situated in the Ohio River Valley, Cincinnati is a bit of an anomaly to most of Ohio, which is flat. Cincinnati has lots of hills. In fact, we've heard it, or I've heard it compared to the steep terrain of your Bay Area. So, you know, it's the Midwest Bay Area. We love our hills in Cincinnati. But with those hills come valleys. And in those valleys, the polluted air of our industrial town hangs low like ripe fruit above our communities, making it difficult to breathe in those scorching summers. We often joke that people who previously had no allergies before or asthma developed them immediately upon stepping foot in Cincinnati. So Cincinnati is also, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Cincinnati, but it's also a pretty segregated city. At one point, we were ranked as the 6th most segregated city in the country. There are stark dividing lines between Black and white communities, like my own neighborhood. So in my neighborhood, it's divided. There's a street that divides us. So one half of the street, on the east side of the street, it's called Rhode Island. And then on the west side of the street, it's called Section Avenue. And that street separates predominantly Black Bond Hill, where I live, from predominantly white Norwood. And I should say historically, because while that's a pretty much of a dividing line, it's a little bit more ambiguous now. But historically, it's meant a lot. But it's not just the geography that's segregated in Cincinnati. A few years ago, the Urban League of Southwest Ohio found that there were sharp disparities that separated zip codes in Cincinnati that fell along racial lines. And ongoing studies like the recent neighborhood vulnerability assessment led by the city of Cincinnati and other researchers found that, just reinforced those outcomes. So some Black communities, some Black neighborhoods have life expectancies up to 20 years shorter than predominantly white ones. There were higher rates of illnesses like diabetes, some cancers, preterm birth and infant mortality, and of course, asthma and allergies in Black neighborhoods. Now this is what we call climate vulnerability, right? This is what climate vulnerability looks like from the perspective of those communities who are most impacted. So why am I talking about these communities, right? Why did I come here today on this conference on decarbonization and talk about the communities where I come from? Well, I think that many of us understand the need to decarbonize our communities. We do this work every day, right? I'm sure if I could see all of you and I picked on one of you and I asked you to shoot out some statistics on the impact that increased carbon has on our cities, I'm sure that some of you could do that. And eventually, you might also talk about the impact of climate on climate vulnerable communities. But when I talk to my family, my dad, who is 67 and still battles asthma, my aunt, who's 73 years old and has emphysema and relies on an oxygen tank, both of whom I've been terrified would develop COVID. When I talk to them and I talk to other family members and friends, those statistics mean nothing. They're too busy dealing with the effects of our changing climate, environmental racism, toxic stress, and so many inequities to address the systemic causes of those conditions. And for those of my BIPOC friends and colleagues who are addressing those issues, they fail to see the correlation between them and climate change. In fact, just last week, I was chatting with the head of our local urban league who moved to Cincinnati from Denver a few years back, 2 years ago. And when he came here, he was ready to lead the charge on climate change. He was all ready to do it. He was like, I'm going to create the Climate Resilience and Race Center here in Cincinnati. But when he came here and he started to talk to the community, he was told that climate issues weren't a top priority for Blacks in Cincinnati, that we have too many other pressing issues to deal with. That's what he was told. But what so many of us have failed to see is that the problem in these communities, these problems are issues in our communities. You'd be hard pressed to find an organization or a community group that doesn't understand the impact of our city's lack of affordable housing, health disparities, transportation deficiencies, and so many other issues on our BIPOC communities. Energy burden is a huge issue in Cincinnati. In fact, one organization found not too long ago that the #1 reason that Cincinnatians use predatory loan agencies was to cover their energy costs. Our housing stock is very old here and it's inefficient. Our social services agencies are full of folks looking for assistance for their energy bills. Now, another story. Early on in my career, I worked for our city's largest social services nonprofit, dispersing Federal Recovery Act funds to families at risk of homelessness. One of my clients, I'll call her Maria, was applying for the program. And Maria came to me one day. She had sat in our waiting room, waited for me to be available. She had all of her paperwork ready, her bills and everything, to meet with me to get assistance for this in this program. So the program would cover up to $5,000 to prevent families and individuals from losing their homes due to the downturn in the economy back in 2008. The problem for Maria was that she had a $40,000 energy bill, an electric bill, that had to be paid in order to prevent an energy shutoff. Now, I don't know if you remember, I said that our program only covered $5,000. So for her, she was at risk of homelessness. Her home was inhabitable because she couldn't afford to heat it. And in Cincinnati, I've talked about how hot it can be during the summer, but it can get pretty cold in the winter. And at either time, it's essential to have adequate heating and adequate cooling. So the program was not designed to meet her level of need. But the thing is, she wasn't alone. There were many other people who faced the same issue. So what if Maria understood that her program was a symptom of a larger issue? What if she understood how our society's reliance on inefficient energy sources, racist policies like redlining that concentrated BIPOC folks into neighborhoods deemed undesirable, and crumbling infrastructure created the problem that she faced? What if the social services agency for which I worked at that time could have used those recovery funds to invest in clean energy and energy efficient housing options for things like weatherization, retrofitting, renewable energy in BIPOC and frontline communities? What if organizations like the Urban League that I mentioned early on and our local NAACP could advocate for policies that prioritize decarbonization in climate vulnerable communities? What if our utility companies, our local governments, and our decision makers work collaboratively with those most impacted to devise culturally relevant solutions to these challenges? What if we formed a mutually beneficial network or an ecosystem of organizations in which all involved parties could meet their vested interests? Last year, City Lab released a study, and the study was on the best metro areas for Black women. Researchers found that the Midwest, by and large, was the worst region for Black women. If you all aren't familiar with Cincinnati, Cincinnati is right smack dab in the Midwest. So of the top 6 worst metro regions, 4 of them were in the Midwest. Cincinnati was number 6. The study evaluated income level, health conditions, and education level. In terms of health outcomes for Black women, Cincinnati ranked the 5th worst. Interestingly, the City of Cincinnati's Neighborhood Vulnerability Assessment used some of the same criteria to evaluate a neighborhood's resilience, or lack thereof in many cases, to climate impacts. Areas with lower income levels, greater health disparities, and lower educational levels were often BIPOC communities and were generally more vulnerable to climate change. So what does all of this mean? What if we understood that the key to Black women's ability to thrive in the Midwest lies at the intersection of climate action and racial justice, and that investment in decarbonization and other green infrastructure strategies can and should yield better outcomes for BIPOC communities? I think we all know this. Right now, we're at a pivotal moment in our nation's trajectory. We stand on the precipice of a climate catastrophe. Some studies predict that we have a few short years to prevent catastrophic climate change. And some say, obviously, we know that it's too late. We're in the middle of a pandemic that has ravaged our world, with BIPOC communities most drastically impacted. We have been made to reckon with centuries of racial oppression and in a society that's growing more and more divided. We're also hopeful, expecting to see an influx of federal funds into climate mitigation and green infrastructure. A lot of the organizations and agencies that I work with are planning for those dollars to trickle down into our communities. So unlike our nation's last major infrastructure investment, and that was the US highway system, which had a devastating impact on these same communities that we now call climate vulnerable. In fact, my mom's community here in Cincinnati was completely obliterated by Interstate 75. We now have the opportunity to create something new, a new, equitable, carbon neutral society that benefits us all. But for me, and what I understand from my work, is that it's imperative that we reframe the ways that we talk about climate impacts and decarbonization. I think that it calls for us, if we want to see this change, to look at the issue with new eyes. Now, I'm a communications professional. I've worked in public engagement and in some capacity for over a decade. And I understand that the power of effective communication. I'm here telling you my story and telling you this story because I think that this is an effective way to communicate with you today. I understand that effective communication isn't just talking at folks, which I'm doing to you right now, but it's in the equal exchange and the give and take of ideas and stories. It's in valuing what others have to say as much as what we have to share. Excuse me. Now, pardon me. It's imperative that we embrace this approach with the communities most impacted by our planet's changing climate. One thing that's important to remember is that our nation's BIPOC communities know a thing or two about resilience. Those, through centuries of perilous conditions and oppression, we've persisted. So how can we develop new strategies that value the lived experience and generational knowledge of BIPOC communities? How can we transition the ways we frame the climate crisis to not just incorporate, but privilege the perspectives of climate vulnerable communities? Now, I'm asking you these questions. I'm coming here today not because I have all of the solutions. I have ideas, and my organization, which I'll talk about now, has done some work toward this, obviously. But I'm here asking questions because I want this to be a conversation that we can have together, and that collectively we can come up with these solutions. The solutions will be generated collectively. So my organization, Green Umbrella, is implementing some of them. We're the region's Environmental Sustainability Alliance. We serve as the seat of environmental collaboration in our region. And what that means is that we coordinate our region's environmental strategies across sectors. So that's government institutions, corporate, nonprofits, et cetera. And we do this to reduce redundancy and to expedite solutions. We're a collective impact organization. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the collective impact model, but essentially it's a model of systems change that says that if we are able to coordinate those different players, each of those players who are working on a particular issue, and get them to align around the same goals and the same measurement, that we are able to get to the solution of a problem much faster than if we were to work in silos. So currently our organization, just to tell you a little bit more about Green Umbrella, we house our region's 2030 district, which looks to reduce carbon and water use and transportation emissions by 50% by 2030. We also house Tri-State Trails, which is our region's regional trail network, and the Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council, which advocates for equitable solutions to address food scarcity and to support our local food economy. In addition, we convene several impact teams, which are kind of like small coalitions that seek to advance healthy people, a sustainable built environment, climate policy, and vibrant landscapes across our region, our metro region. While we work to advance sustainable solutions in our region, our work to engage climate vulnerable communities, I would say is burgeoning. And the reason I say that is that Green Umbrella is doing really great work, but often I'm the only person of color in the room. So recently a colleague and I collaborated with Groundwork Ohio River Valley, and the City of Cincinnati on an equity advisory group. And it's part of a pilot program that we're launching. And over 6 weeks, we brought together residents of one of the city's most vulnerable communities to discuss neighborhood resilience. The neighborhood, called Lower Price Hill, sits in one of those valleys that I mentioned earlier where the air just kind of hangs there, and it's a racially mixed neighborhood. It's less than a mile from a wastewater processing facility. It borders the city's old industrial corridor, and it sits on the outskirts of the downtown business district. So when we were facilitating this group, we brought in representatives from local governments, from different agencies and nonprofits, so that the participants could share their concerns and experiences with those decision makers. The EAG created a community resilience map at the end. And so what they did was identify the needs of their community from their own perspective, and they mapped it out. They mapped out mitigation strategies. So they talked about things like cooling centers, and they were able to identify where those were most needed. More tree canopy, rain gardens. So they were able to determine what would best benefit their community. Now, our goal is to convene similar groups in other climate vulnerable communities and to train communities to host their own groups. We'd also like to introduce the program as a community engagement tool for local governments across our 10-county Greater Cincinnati metro region. The goal is to use this valuable information to update our city's community resilience plan, which we call the Green Cincinnati Plan. That plan includes 80 strategies to reduce our city's carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. The plan details built environment, education and outreach, energy, food, natural systems, resilience, transportation, and waste strategies. And my organization works collaboratively to implement and monitor progress towards those goals. Another part of my work, I convene an interfaith coalition called Faith Communities Go Green. And this group convenes around community strategies for reducing the carbon footprint of our congregations. So this is a new approach for us because so much of our work has focused on convening collaboration with those larger institutions and with the government and government agencies and so forth. Well, this is our first real effort to bring together community members, or the private sector. So we're looking to engage them around strategies for improving their own faith communities by educating their congregation, transitioning their facilities to renewable energy sources, and advocating for policy that supports decarbonization. But there's so much more work to be done. Now, in my view, it is imperative that my organization, my city, my community, and beyond, that we really work collaboratively. And that's kind of, as I mentioned, the work of Green Umbrella. But there's still such an overwhelming need for participation by BIPOC organizations and communities. And the onus is not on them to join our work, but rather it's for those of us practitioners and professionals in this field to make our message relevant to them. We have to understand that environmental justice is racial justice, that the predominant perspective in our field is not one that's centered in the lived experiences of the communities most impacted by the problems we seek to solve. If we want climate policy and solutions that benefit us all, then the path forward must be led by the climate vulnerable, which means that we need a way to amplify their stories and prioritize their leadership. Now, I shared my stories today about my community and my city with you, not just because I wanted to have story time with you folks on the West Coast. I did it because I wanted to provide some context to the situation here in Cincinnati and into the discussion of decarbonization. We know that we're in a climate crisis, and I believe that that crisis looks different depending on your vantage point, and that if we want to come up with innovative solutions, then we must learn to value the perspectives of the communities that are most impacted. And so today I just wanted to engage in a conversation with you around this. And I talked at you for a while, and now I'd love to talk with some of you. Ooh, I see, and now I can see all of the comments. I'd love to have some conversation with you all.
Well, and thank you for this. So first of all, like, yay, your story time.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. I was like shivering and I was pacing back and forth and it was awesome. And you completely occupied my mind and it was awesome. So then, and we would be transitioning into discussion. That's our last agenda item today because we were missing a presentation and you
Okay.
moved forward. So you have the floor. I appreciate anyone to speak on up your questions like Evita. If you want to speak, you're putting a bunch of, let's see, do I need to promote people? Aloha Lani, can we get, how do we promote everyone over to panelists so everyone can talk? You know how to do that?
I'm doing it now.
There's the magic. Thank you. So anyone, if you'd like to chat, I'll put myself on mute so I don't take it over.
Thank you all.
It's slowly but steadily going. 1 second.
And as it happens, lest there be a quiet moment. So the story that you have, I'm from like the Milwaukee area, completely identify with the communities being just raised in order to put in fake highways that were unnecessary in those communities. It was one of the many ways that enforcing intense racial segregation. And so what do you think is your most powerful intersectional success? Is it with the faith communities? People seeing God on the earth and themselves and in their own community and their health, and like, is that the place where you're finding a locus of success? Because there are churches that we've helped in California electrify their campus and put in resiliency, and what kind of, where's it working well?
So that effort is very new. So a little background, our organization has been around for 22 years. And for the last decade or so, we were working towards these big 2020 goals. And we had 7 action teams. So they convened around transportation, outdoor recreation, energy, you know, all of these different issues. And we convened them for 10 years. And at the end of 2019, we resigned them and we launched new teams working towards new goals because obviously 2020 had arrived. And so this team, Faith Communities Go Green, is relatively new. And I think that it has the potential to be a great success, but I would say that our best work, I mentioned that Green Cincinnati plan. We work very closely with the city of Cincinnati, and we have been, you know, we kind of led the community engagement with the development of that plan. And so for me, the best work, the strongest work that we're able to do is when we're able to engage communities to bring them into play with and able to converse with decision makers so that they're able to have some influence. And obviously, I would say that's most important because I am a community engagement professional. Yes, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments.
We'll read it out loud, but go ahead if you, well, then I'll just, thank you, Rashida. I grew up in Cincinnati and remember those 90-degree summer days and some sub-zero winter days. So interested to hear about Green Umbrella. Wish I could stay on, but I have to, another Zoom meeting I have to jump over to.
Bye. But yeah, so again, the work that we do a lot, we're launching a lot of climate policy work. And so we are working with the smaller local governments. So the city of Cincinnati has done quite a bit of work around these issues. So they have a large solar installation so that all of our city buildings can be powered by solar. The city is a part of our 2030 district. We have other organizations, other large corporations on board to move towards some of those solutions. So those things are great, but we are a county that we have a 10 county region, and that includes Northern Kentucky and Eastern Indiana. And so our work now is kind of to spread those learnings out to those other smaller municipalities and who don't have the same resources and
So going from the city to the more rural areas around you.
yes.
Being that kind of resource.
Mm-hmm.
Evita, do you want to speak up? Can't hear you yet. It might be the microphone. She'll be back in a moment. I'm wondering, what is the point source? What is the pollution that's hanging in the valleys? Like, what is the decarbonization? Not a particular word I like. I like electrification.
Mm-hmm.
What do people identify as the source of that pollution that needs to be resolved by not burning stuff? What is the burning stuff?
So the number one issue that we have identified that's why we launched the 2030 district is that the majority of those emissions come from our the built environment from our large buildings in our downtown area.
Oh,
That's why we have this goal to reduce those by, and I'm sorry, I keep talking about a 2030 district. I believe you all have, is everyone familiar with the 2030 district kind of model? Okay, you know what? So that's probably a good idea. So 2030 districts were started, I believe, in Seattle. And I do not, we have a 2030 district here in Cincinnati, but I don't work with the 2030 district. It is housed within our organization. My colleagues work with it. So I'm going to give you a synopsis of it based on my perspective and what I know. I do collaborate with those folks pretty often. So the 2030 district is a national model for cities that looks at getting them to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, transportation emissions and water usage by 50% by 2030. And they do that through the built environment. And that's really more through kind of those large building owners. So they work with developers, they work with building managers to propose solutions to start to reach some of these strategies. And so it's voluntary, the organizations sign on to be a part of it. And then we provide all of the support and the resources to help them to get to that point by the goal, which is 2030. So we launched ours. Ours was the 21st, I believe, in the nation. And we launched it about 3 years ago at this point. And so they're working to, and we have really good uptake. So lots of the businesses, the large businesses in our region have signed on. And I believe we have the largest square footage committed at this point. So I can't tell you off the top of my head how many square feet have been committed, but there's quite a bit. And so the idea is that we can, it's voluntary, that they can take these, start to adopt these solutions. And so I had mentioned the 2030 district as, I can't remember why I brought that up. Someone asked a question.
The point source of pollution you're saying is
yes.
buildings. And just
Yeah.
I want to volunteer our time, my time, to, if there's any need for big heat pump design, I myself am familiar with how to do that. And then there's other people that we could bring in, some of whom are on this, who are real technical experts. Should that be
Nice.
volunteer assistance to decarbonize those buildings with their next retrofits?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I hope.
Yeah, so we do have what we call 2030 district partners. And so those are the folks, the folks who are actually able to go in and provide the solutions and things for the buildings. So yes, it would be great to connect with you.
Awesome. Yeah, fellow Midwesterner. I'd like to.
Yeah.
There's like a little town next to Madison called Cross Plains that called up, and I helped them out with, you know, like slide decks and making presentation kind of thing.
Nice.
I was so pleased to get to help out home, the people that I grew up with, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So, Evita, are you coming back in and out? Are you there because you want to ask a question? It's in your video. Or, Wei Tai, do you want to say hello?
I just wanted to comment that that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for sharing your story, and it was so personal, and a lot of it so resonated with me as well. Growing up in Virginia in the South, you know.
Okay.
They were it was somewhat segregated too, but here we are. Fast forward decades later, hopefully things are a little better, and but we still have a lot of work to do. So
We do.
Please keep at it, and know you have allies all over the country.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Evita says that she doesn't have an unmute button, so should you, if you want to type in, I think she had a comment that we could read out though.
Maybe only the panelists are able to unmute. Is that possible? Maybe the host can be sure the settings are such that everybody can unmute. Avida, okay.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
I can.
Hi. Oh my God, finally. Sorry, everyone. I'm actually joined on my phone now. I was on my computer, then I had to hop off to make this work. Anyway, Rashida, I just wanted to say, great presentation. I loved the story that you told us, your own story, and also that I 100% agree that we really need to think of new language and a different way of communicating the same things that we've been trying to communicate. You know, as an architect, I appreciate, Rashida, that you're big on communication and you're a communications person, because I think as architects and engineers, sometimes that's the most difficult piece for us. Is, you know, we know all the technical things, but how do we communicate it in a way that it makes sense to somebody who doesn't have all this knowledge or doesn't have all this background? And the hard reality is that, you know, you use the word decarbonization outside of our industry anywhere, it doesn't have any meaning. Nobody really knows what that means or why they should care about it or why it would impact them. So, you know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I think it's great that organizations like yours are working with communities to build, sort of bridge this gap. I'm also kind of wondering, what can we do for our industry, architects and engineers, you know, to be able to communicate better? Maybe there are things we could learn from you.
So one of the things we work with quite a bit, especially with the 2030 district, but with other of our initiatives, with architects and with engineering folks and with planners. And so we work really closely with our regional council on governments. And so what we found, and what I would say from our perspective, is to collaborate. And so, you know, I mentioned that we're a collective impact organization, and that we recognize basically that everyone has a different role to play in the work that we're doing. And so for some of us, that means you're doing the work that you said. You're a practitioner. You're working with the buildings, and you're devising and implementing the strategies. And for some of us, we are communicators. So we are there to communicate those changes to communities. Some of us are decision makers within and able to advocate and change policy. So the green umbrella, the green umbrella answer to your question would be, it's all about collaboration. So it's about bringing together those folks and collaborating with those organizations that are experts in those areas where perhaps you aren't. And so our region, and you know, collective impact is not new. You know, it's something that that cities and communities have been leading for years. But for us, it's about how do we coordinate, right? All of the different players within across sectors, I should say. So how do we bring together those decision makers? How do we make sure that the work that each of you are doing, that you're talking to each other, communicating with each other, and that the folks over here who are coming up with these new innovations are able to have those innovations be informed by the folks like me who are working in communities and communicating with folks and creating opportunities for people to share their feedback and to learn about these things, and vice versa. How do we make sure that our decision makers and our elected officials understand the work that your sector is doing? And how do we make sure that our corporations understand the newest innovations that are there? So it's all about kind of creating this ecosystem where everyone has a part to play, and we're able to mutually create a mutually beneficial environment where we're all able to learn and grow from each other.
In doing that, are you doing like conferences where you bring all these different constituent groups together to talk with each other? Are you doing like, is it big groups or small groups? Like, I'm curious about just the very tactics of how you create these conversations.
Yeah, so as my role, I plan our conference. We have a regional sustainability conference every year. So we bring together folks from across the region and actually folks from outside of the region. So I'm gonna let you know that if you're interested, I will send you information when it's time to happen again. And we'd love to hear about your organization and the work that you're doing, because we're looking for solutions from across the country. So we do that every year. We host different lunch and learns and opportunities for people to come together. We try to do that quarterly, where we're a member-based organization. So we invite our members to come and to network with each other. A lot of that has happened over Zoom lately, obviously, but we bring them together and we bring in different speakers to learn about different topics. Then we also, you know, I mentioned those impact teams. So we actually bring together employees, you know, folks who are working in each of these different sectors and different companies, different organizations, different government agencies to come together. Depending on what the impact team is, they meet at different times. And the idea is that they can share resources, share ideas, and kind of coordinate among each other, working towards a common goal. And so each of those teams has a different goal that they're working toward. And the idea is that each member of the team can bring their own resources and their expertise to that convening, and then bring their organizations on board. So we don't want it to just be, you know, an individual saying, I'm interested in this, but really when you're coming, you're a decision maker within your organization, and you're able to represent your actual organization, and they're able to implement the changes or the goals, or, you know, that we're trying to set up common metrics across all of these different entities. So it's about streamlining the process so that we're all able to work together. Yeah.
That's really impressive. And I get where you got the green umbrella idea, like way, I think of it almost like a parallel government with subcommittees and committees and then commissions and then decisions. Like there's certainly a lot of groups of people who are having conversations that are not within the existing traditional government structure that's like a planning commission or something like that gets developed and approved. Like, this is okay. That's really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to figure. I'm not sure if anyone on this crew of people here, are you familiar with examples of like that in the Bay Area or in Los Angeles that have these like a deliberately collaborative intersectional approach that includes environmental justice, but also food production? It sounds like you have a pretty.
I can talk about what the food production piece looks like. So our Food Policy Council, you know, they work, it's a policy council, obviously, so they advocate for you know, policy strategies to address the issues food scarcity, but they also work with farmers. So there are farmers in our region who are local farmers, who are growers, who are in need of finding a place to, you know, get their food, their produce, or whatever their wares are out to the community. And so we're able to, through our Farm to School initiative, able to connect those growers, those producers to institutions like the school systems, so that they can provide fresh foods to our students, and to hospitals, and to some of our universities. And so we're working with the whole system so that it's, you know, from production to consumers. And then when there's waste, we're looking to, we coordinate with organizations to collect that additional food waste and to turn it into food that can then be used to feed other communities. So it's a whole system there, and our role is to kind of coordinate that. So that's just the food area of our work.
That's sophisticated. And around here, that's called CAF. It's done some of those roles. Mm-hmm. Do you have a CAF? Is that one of the group that, no? Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, that's fantastic. I don't want to divert from our conversations about bringing our little piglets, which do get diverted food waste, and we do turn around as part of the farmers market. And,
nice.
And this is part of the ecosystem you're discussing there. Mm-hmm. Very familiar, but because it's so important to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food waste going into landfills, this huge issue of creating methane. Mm-hmm. Yes, and supporting food networks. So there was a question that I needed to get to you. So Jamie Jang says, I love that you're an expert in communications and that you're joining all these like-minded institutions to wield greater power. I'm very interested in community engagement. 2 questions. 1, what are the key organizational challenges or solutions to aligning multiple organizations? So organizational challenges to aligning all these different organizations. What's a challenge and solution? And then can you give us a communications 101 on interpersonal interaction when trying to bridge gaps and build community?
Sure. So to address the first question, there are so many challenges when you're bringing together all of these entities. So, you know, everyone has their own agenda. And that can sound kind of, you know, negative, like, oh, you're bringing your own agenda. It's not that. Every organization has their own priorities, and what may be a priority at this particular time is not the priority for this organization over here. Organization A is working on this, organization B is working on this, and both of them want their issues to be the main issue that Green Umbrella is tackling, right? So that's one issue. Our challenge, I'll say. Sometimes it can be really challenging. What we found with our action teams is that after 10 years of convening them, they had become more of an opportunity for folks to just get together and network, and there weren't as many solutions that were coming out of the work. And so that's why we resigned them and created these opportunities for, you know, these quarterly convenings, because folks really value that convening and that networking opportunity. But then also we convened smaller, more concentrated teams to work on actual issues. For instance, I'm launching a new team called Environmental Health and Housing. So that team will consist of practitioners and decision makers, and not just folks who are like, oh, I really care about this issue, but I don't have, you know, I'm not able to I don't have any connection to it in any way. So it's about making sure that we are bringing together the right people to address these issues. Let's think of another challenge. I mean, I think you can imagine how difficult it might be to bring together entities.
Do you have a consensus decision-making process? Do you have a majority vote process? Do you have a consensus -1? How do you get these groups to decide on something?
So, you know, it's funny that you say that. We're actually working on what that might look like, because honestly, it hasn't come up. We're as Green Umbrella, which is interesting that it hasn't come up. part of the issue is that folks are like, you're Green Umbrella, you guys decide, and we'll just follow along. And that is not the model that we hold. We want everyone to be equal participants, and our role is really to create the convening space and the opportunity to support whatever comes out of these collaborations, and not to necessarily lead them. So some of our teams, they decide on how they do decision making. Some of them do consensus. Some of them we've implemented, what is it, fist of five for some of ours. Is anyone familiar with that? Where essentially when you're voting on or deciding on something, you hold up 5 fingers, 4 fingers. If you hold up 3 fingers, it means 5 and 4 mean that you support it, right? 5, you're totally on board. 4, you're there, you might have some reservations. 3 means that, you're a little bit unsure, you have questions, and you need those questions to be resolved. And then it goes down, to 1 finger where it's like, no, I don't like this. And then a fist, if anyone puts up a fist, that stops it altogether. And you're not able to move forward until you get rid of all of the fists and everyone is at least agreeing to move forward. And so it requires that you really talk out the issues and,
Do you need to get everyone into a 4 and a 5 or into a 3 to 5?
3 to 5.
3 to 5.
Yes.
Okay.
So.
If you're a 1 but not a fist, what happens?
You just talk about it, and then you re-vote, and you see if you can move that person up, but you can move forward if you have, a couple of 1s or a couple of 2s. You cannot move forward if you have any fists. So, right.
This is like a consensus thing.
It is. Yes, it's consensus.
But you get to rank, and it's like, is there a point system? Do you add them up if you get to a certain number of points?
So no, it's not points. It's the number of people who are at each. So we have 20 5s and 17 4s and, so forth. And then, so it's based on the number of each. And if the majority of folks are 3, 4, or 5, then you can move forward. But if the majority are 1s or 2s, you can't move forward. And if you have without discussion, and then if you have any fists, then you cannot move forward at all. So if we were to have, 30 people in a room and we had 20, 5s, 2, and 3 1s, and that was it. And we could move forward because the majority would say, they're 5s. But if you have just 1 fist, you cannot move forward. So. Okay,
so that's a wonderful. There's all sorts of ways to voice your kind of consensus. And if anyone talk, and that's very dynamic, right? I like that.
We didn't create that, but that is something that we've been looking at implementing.
And then, can you give a communications 101 on interpersonal interaction when trying to bridge gaps and build community? So you might do what you want to do with that? Sure. Okay.
So it's a big, I think the number 1 lesson is listening. And what we found, and I'll just use the example of this community or the equity advisory group that we convened earlier this year that I mentioned. We approached the community members. We partnered with organizations that were already active in the community and had already established a relationship with the community members, so that when we were coming together, we could really listen and understand. Okay, I will get to your question just as soon as I finish this. But and so we brought together those folks to really just share, and we listened to what they had to say. And sometimes what they had to say was not what we wanted to hear. There was some feedback that was, for some of the speakers and the organizations that we brought in to allow that direct feedback for so that our participants could speak to decision makers. Some of it was really difficult feedback. And so, but we just, the number one priority was listening and no value judgment, not putting our own agendas and our own value to what they had to say. The second piece, I think, is to not use a lot of jargon. Because I think that a lot of times we go in and we only know the ways to talk about the issues from our own perspective and the ways that we communicate with each other. And so if you're communicating with someone who is a novice or someone who is just living the reality of these issues, but has no kind of technical understanding of them, you have to be able to communicate in a way that is understandable to them. The other piece, and I'll just go with three, the last one that I think is so important, and it kind of goes off along with what I just said, is that shifting our frame of reference so that we're not understanding the issues from our own perspectives, but from the perspectives of those who are impacted or who we're trying to address. So I was talking about this with a colleague earlier this week. And what we were saying is, if you're talking to someone who, like Maria, who I mentioned in my story, who has this really high energy bill and is dealing with all of these issues, and she's not able to heat her home, and she's at risk of homelessness. If you go to Maria and you're talking about decarbonization, she's like, what the heck are you talking about? But if you go to Maria and you're like, man, it's really an issue that that folks are not able to have, quality housing, and that there are people who are at risk of losing or they can't cool their homes, or they can't heat their homes because they don't have efficient energy sources, and they're all of these things. If you go in and you speak to Maria in that way, and you're able to relate to what her actual experience is, then she's more likely to listen to what you're saying. And so that is what is key, is that when we are talking to, community members or whoever, that we're able to really make it relatable, and I mentioned early on that with the Urban League that they were saying, this is, folks told the executive director that climate issues are not a concern. But all of those issues that I laid out that I experienced and that other folks in the community are experiencing, those can all be related back to climate. And so if we're able to really understand, yes, you have issues in your community that you're already dealing with, and all of the, if we're able to relate that to the issues that are already of concern to them, then we're more likely to get their buy-in. And so it's, again, that's what I meant by kind of shifting perspective. So those are some solutions, hopefully that was what you were looking for. You're welcome. And then someone asked about, let's see, sorry, there was a question about the 2030 district. So the 2030 district actually came later. So I mentioned that we had those action teams. We had an energy action team, and the energy team, someone came on the team was really interested in that 2030 district model, and they were convening about it, and we knew that it was a priority that was listed in our Green Cincinnati plan. And so we got the funding and the resources together to be able to support that and the implementation of our own district here in Cincinnati. So it came after Green Umbrella.
Benefit of others. Do you mind if I read it out loud?
Mm-hmm.
Alice Sung is asking, do you feel that the local government or others in power really shared leadership and decision-making with the community members and the impacted stakeholders? How so?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And I think that, thank you. And I would say that we're not totally there yet. So it's not shared leadership, and it's not shared decision making, but we're trying to move there. And so right now what we're doing, the city conducted this equity I'm sorry, environmental, I can't think of the name of it, but a study, basically resilience assessment and community resilience assessment. And we understand that there is a need for us in order to move forward and to implement these changes, that we have to understand the impacts, the ways that communities are dealing with these impacts. And so we're looking to create these, to do these evaluations and create those maps, like I mentioned, that the Lower Price Hill community created across the 52 communities in Cincinnati, and then putting those all together into one large map that's able to show all of the needs of each community, and then using that to inform the Green Cincinnati plan, which is actually being enforced by our local government. And so it's a step, and I think that it's a small step, but I do think that some of our local governments are starting to see that it is important to hear from our community members and to use that feedback in kind of creating some of the solutions. We have a long way to go before it's full, equal, shared leadership and shared decision making, but I think that this is a step in the right direction.
That's great. Sean, can I follow up with a question?
Please.
Alice. Thanks so much, Rashida. This is just like, I could talk for hours on this with you, so maybe we'll connect offline. But
yes,
quickly, can you, and forgive me if you actually said this, I had to step out for a minute in your discussion. What was the impetus, and how did Green Umbrella come about? And can you relay to us how might any other municipality or community or region come together to create their own Green Umbrella in their own state?
Sure.
What advice?
So Green Umbrella actually started out as just a group of volunteers. For the first 12 years or so, we were totally totally volunteer-led. And so we were focused on green space conservation in our region. And there are volunteers who really cared about the issue, and we're, just meeting to discuss it. And honestly, there's
wait. Okay, what issue was it?
Conservation. It was just really
conservation, not yet climate change.
No, we were not there. And so it was just conservation, and we created a green print for the region that kind of laid out priority protection areas that we'd like to local entities who were kind of land management and conservation entities to be able to prioritize these different areas. So that was the first for 12 years. That's kind of what it focused on. And then kind of about 5 or 6 years in, there started to be an outdoor education and recreation addition. And so that's when we started convening one of our largest events that we still hold to this day, Great Outdoor Weekend. So we did that for 10 years. So then around 2010, we did that for 12 years. This is from 1998 to 2010. So around 2010, there were local planning agencies. So we had a Vision 20, I think it was 2015 originally, or 2010, and it was the chamber's kind of vision for how we might change Cincinnati. And it had all of these different entities in it, but it didn't have anything to do with environment. And so the folks who were involved in the Vision 2010, at the time, Vision 2020, like all of these years are running together. The folks who were involved in Vision 2020 were like, well, we need to bring together the environmental sector. There's all of this work happening in these different places. How do we create an entity that can kind of coordinate all of that work? And that was where it came from.
So excuse me, Vision 2020 was the city's sort of plan, or
yeah,
who sponsors the Vision 2020?
The city and the local chamber of commerce.
Okay, thanks.
And there was also one in a similar, and I cannot remember the name of the one in Northern Kentucky, but they also had their own vision planning project. And so they were also looking, they were working together. And I mentioned the collective impact work. So collective impact really is something that launched in the Cincinnati area, and it started out in education, and we had an entity that was able to coordinate students from K through 6 for kindergarten readiness. So they created this really important model, and that was bringing together all of these different decision makers. I don't know if folks have heard of this. It's called Strive. And so that model then was, lots of organizations were saying, oh, we need to try this model. And Green Umbrella was implemented that model. We adopted the model, and that's how we started the work of bringing together that cross-sector collaboration. It really helped with the partners that we had on board, because the city was on board, and different entities like the park systems were on board. We had our local council of governments involved, and large corporations involved as well, the Kroger company and others. So because of all of that initial interest, we were able to kind of solidify ourselves as an entity to be a part of, and we've continued to grow since then. We became a membership-based organization in 2010.
Great, thanks for that. You need to write that story down.
Yes,
so
it is.
Actually just spread that, right? we need with something that we can easily spread to every area that needs it.
Well, I would say check out our website. We're greenumbrella.org.
I'm on it, yeah.
Okay. And you can learn a lot more about kind of that story. It was really short, my version of it, but you can learn the real in-depth story behind Green Umbrella if you look at our website.
That'd be great. Thanks. Yeah, funding would be key. Like you obviously have some key funders, right? Did you have to write grants in the beginning?
We still do. Yes. Yes, we are primarily grant funded, private, federal, and state grants.
Oh, you're federally funded. That's nice.
We have some programs that are federally funded, like the work that we're doing, the farm to school work, has a USDA grant.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
We're able to do a lot of that work through that way.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Like a sophisticated, well-diversified funding resource. And you're like, and it really becomes in because you have a lot of different constituent groups that you're serving under the umbrella.
Right.
The resiliency financially, like to keep it all together working.
What is amazing though is, right, you said you started in 1998, right,
Yeah.
with conservationists.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a long haul, right?
It really is.
To get to this point, like, right, so those of us who are just starting to begin to try to convene and move at the pace and scale that we need action at, it's quite daunting.
Well, think about this though. It was when they decided to have a collaborative effort, and the decision, then how many groups joined together like that? Like how many?
Yes.
The decision to go collaboratively was quick.
That was in 2010. And so after that, we started convening kind of stakeholder engagement meetings and inviting different entities to participate. And we tried to make sure, again, that shared decision making so that we were able to meet the interests of all of those groups. And then they worked to create those 2020 goals, each of those during those convenings that we held initially. And then those 2020 goals we were able to bring in different entities who also were decision makers, our stakeholders within that, towards meeting those goals. And so that was how we were able to bring in more people or more organizations.
Yeah, but it still took you 12 years to get there almost, right? And then now here we are almost another 12 years later.
So the 12 years, I mean, I will say that, yes, I don't want you to be It seems daunting, but I would say for those first 12 years, it was just a conservation group of volunteer led. We hired the first person in 2010. And I think it was also key, the person that we hired, he is a bit of a legend in our region, Brewster Rhodes. He has worked at the federal level. He was a lobbyist, environmental lobbyist in the 70s, and he's very well known in our region. And so he had the connections and the relationships to bring folks together. Yeah. So I think I've been talking for a while now.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yay,
Thank you. You all are fantastic.
You're fantastic. This is a great pleasure to meet you. And I just want to reiterate my my request to volunteer for your organization in a technical capacity, specifically on getting those big buildings decarbonized downtown. I have lots of resources and a book on it, and people and engineers, and anything you need that I can help with, I'd love to help with.
So I will connect you with the director of the 2030 district, Elizabeth Rojas, who would be perfect for you to get connected with for supporting that.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also want to connect with you on our environmental health and housing initiative. So
here I am. Like I have an open calendar. Like anytime that you want to meet with me, on all my emails, it has my Calendly/Sean Armstrong thing. Mm-hmm. So just grab anytime you want, bring in your friends, whatever it is.
I can do that.
Yes, it's so. This is it. Open door.
Please, thank you.
Hang out with you.
Thank you so much. You all are great.
Reciprocal. So, wait till I wanted to also talk about phase change materials. So Rashida, you're off the hook if you're like,
okay.
If you did your hour and a half almost. You don't have to leave. I'm just saying, like, but you're welcome to, of course.
I got to do dinner for my family now.
Okay. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.